Is now called to order. Before we continue, let me direct the committee secretary to acknowledge our resource persons for today.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning po. For today's public hearing on VAT refund for non-resident tourists, present physically are the following resource persons. From the Department of Finance, we have Undersecretary Dakila Eltin Napao. From the Bureau of Internal Revenue, we have Assistant Commissioner Larry M. Barcelo. From the Bureau of Customs, we have Attorney Annabel Dabu. From the Department of Transportation, we have Attorney Miguel Lander Llave. From the Department of Tourism, we have Undersecretary Shireen Gale C.U. Pamintuan. From the National Economic and Development Authority, we have Undersecretary Rosemary G. Edelion. From the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, we have Deputy Director Maria Angelica B. Villena and Deputy Director Christopher V. Palugod. From the Bureau of Immigration, we have Attorney Arnulfo D. Maminta. From the Manila International Airport Authority, we have Officer in Charge Brian Anderson Waiko. From the Mactan Cebu International Airport Authority, we have General Manager Julius G. Neri Jr. From the Private Sector Advisory Council and Philippine Retailers Association, we have Vice Chairman Roberto S. Claudio Sr. From the Store Specialist Inc. Group, we have Mr. Val Codaverde. From the BIR, we have Assistant Commissioner Maria Luisa L. Belen. And finally, virtually present are Mr. Gavin Ingram and Mr. Nathan Brown from Global Blue. That's all, Your Honor.
Thank you, Committee Secretary. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today in this public hearing. Today we'll be conducting a public hearing on 3 measures. One is House Bill number 7292, and the title is an act creating a VAT refund mechanism for non-resident tourists, adding for the purpose a new section 112A to the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended. This is authored by Congressman Salceda, Suansing, Bascug, Aquino Magsaysay, Dionisio, Dayanghirang, Haresco, Lagon, T. Yap, Luistro, and other members of the House of Representatives. This was transmitted to us already last, when was this transmitted, Comsec? Anyways, it was transmitted to us a few months ago. Another bill that we'll be hearing today is Senate Bill number 2023. The title of this bill, an act creating a VAT refund mechanism for non-resident tourists, adding for the purpose a new section 112A to the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, authored by yours truly. And Senate Bill number 2148, an act creating a VAT refund mechanism for non-resident tourists, adding for the purpose a new section 112A to the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, authored by Senator Jinggoy Estrada. So we have 3 bills on hand right now. One was transmitted to us by the House of Representatives. And normally when the Committee on Ways and Means conducts hearings, a lot of our taxpayers kinakabahan ho because typically it will be about increasing taxes or imposing new taxes on certain goods or services. But today, this is a happy measure, no? Because instead of imposing taxes, we'll be refunding taxes, particularly to tourists, non-resident tourists. No? And this is a very simple measure. No? It's a very straightforward measure. In fact, the bill that I filed is only 3 pages. And if you have notice, all of the titles are pretty much the same. No? So I think all of us have traveled abroad, no? In various jurisdictions, Europe, Asia, America, and I think all of us are very familiar with the VAT refund system no? Especially for Pinoys, no? Alam mo nyo, mga Pinoy mahilig mag-shopping eh, no? Pasulubong is one of our cultural traits, no? Every time we travel. So every time we travel, we always go to the store which has a VAT refund poster in some jurisdiction, and we always go to the airport 5 hours in advance because we would already factor in the lineup to get your VAT refund, no? Especially before checking in or before going into immigration. I think all of us, including myself, do that whenever I travel. So it's part of the tourism experience. Going to a place, shopping, looking at the sites, bringing home goods, and then going to the airport maybe 4 or 5 hours earlier to claim your refund. No? So it's part of the whole experience. In fact, because of that experience, a lot of our kababayans makes it part of their itinerary, to make sure that they shop in VAT refund stores and to make sure that they claim their VAT refund at the end of the trip. And I've seen the evolution of this mechanism in various jurisdiction. Before, it was really manual process. You have to bring in your receipt, you have to open your luggage, show it to the customs, you have to go to the third-party refund entity to get your physical cash. But now, everything is done digitally. In fact, the latest that I've experienced is in Singapore, where everything is already digital. You just show your passport at the store, you go to the airport, you scan your passport, and automatically it will be credited to your credit card. No cash involved already. So we've seen that the VAT refund mechanism has matured so much over the years. And having said that, I was actually surprised that here in ASEAN, if you look at the mid-size and the advanced economies of ASEAN, we're the only one country that do not have a VAT refund mechanism. Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore all have a VAT refund mechanism. And the main goal of this VAT refund mechanism is to attract tourists, to make their experience complete, not only to look at the sites, not only to enjoy food and the beaches, but also to enjoy shopping by getting some form of discount through the VAT refund mechanism. So the end goal here is to increase tourism travel to our country, increase the marketability of the Philippines to tourists. Especially, we're only one of the few countries that implemented a dual passport regime. Not all countries have that. So we implemented that because we all know that we have a lot of compatriots outside of the Philippines. So this is also a way to attract our um, Filipinos living abroad to visit the Philippines more often. They visit the Philippines, but we want them to visit more often. So the underlying goal here is to increase tourism, improve marketability of the Philippines, of course, to put the Philippines on the tourism map. So we all admit that there are some revenue, because it's a refund. We all admit that government will lose some amounts in form of revenue, and we hope that this loss will be compensated by the increase in foot traffic by tourists in our country. They will stay in our hotels, eat in our restaurants, shop in local stores, aside from the big stores. So even though we will lose some amounts in the form of VAT refund, we will gain much more in the form of um, uh, accommodation, even hiring of tour guides. When they pay tour guides, that's actually countryside development, because tour guides are actually one of the poorer segments of the tourism sector. So we have other things to gain in replacement of the VAT amounts that we will lose. So having said that, as my opening speech, walang ibang may senator ba? Wala, no? So, having said that, we'll start off with the department that will stand to benefit in this proposal, which is the Department of Tourism. And we want to understand from the Department of Tourism what this measure can do in terms of improving the number of tourists that will come to the Philippines, improve marketability. Just imagine, no? All of our neighbors are saying, "Oh, we're VAT refund. When you shop, you can get 10% X amount off when you go when you shop in Malaysia or Thailand." In the Philippines, we don't have that selling point. No, tayo lang yung naiwanan in terms of that selling point. So this will just put us at par, no, with other ASEAN countries and also other countries. So we'll start off with the Department of Tourism, and we want to understand how this bill can support the tourism efforts of the government, how this bill can improve the marketability of the Philippines, and of course, other features of the bill that will improve the overall tourism sector of the country. So we'll start off with Undersecretary Pamintuan. Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the rest of the members of this committee, as well as the guests. For the Department of Tourism, we warmly welcome this proposed measure, especially since we recognize there is a phenomenon called the shopping tourism. And we also believe, and based on several studies, that shopping directly contributes to the growth of a local economy. We also believe that the VAT refund mechanism is simply a fiscal relaxation to be given to all of the tourists visiting the country, and with the right policies in place, like the threshold amount, as well as the limited number of days for a tourist to purchase the goods to be taken out of the country together with the tourists. This will boost our competitiveness as well as enhance the tourism product portfolios that we already have here in the Philippines. And together with the Philippine Retails Association, we believe that this will contribute to our vision of also becoming a premier shopping destination here in the Philippines. We also recognize that regardless of a motivation of the traveler to visit a certain destination, shopping will always be part of the bulk item expenditure that a tourist will make. So we also understand that because this is a refund measure and it might result to losses, several studies have also established that the refund mechanism also increases additional shopping. There is a marginal increase in the shopping of a tourist, especially since we have duty-free shopping available at our airports. We think that this will be mutually complementary because the refund will encourage the tourist to spend that amount that was given back to them through our duty-free sales. So we warmly welcome this measure and we fully support it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just to put it on record, USEC, no, because we want to capture the benefits of this bill, considering that we all admit that there'll be some amounts, and DOF will discuss later the amounts that will be lost through the refund. So we want to understand the benefits, no, especially both in terms of how many warm bodies can we attract in terms of tourists, and then what type of spending are we looking at, and at the same time, what type of employment, no, that we're looking at. So I want to discuss with the DOT some numbers in terms of benefits so that we will capture that on record. No? So my first question is, do you have any projection on how many tourists can we capture using this mechanism? And then what type of spending are we looking at? What type of contribution to our economy are we looking at? In terms of employment, how many new jobs can we create with this mechanism? Because obviously new tourists will come in. So just basic numbers, so we'll put it on record.
Mr. Chair, just to put it in perspective, at the height of 2019, which is the pre-pandemic level, our inbound tourist arrivals was actually at 8.2 million. And last year, we have reached our targets and have actually welcomed around 2.6 million tourist arrivals, and we are expecting to have around 4.5 million arrivals this year, and next year to be able to fully recover to our pre-pandemic levels. As I've said earlier, Mr. Chair, while I don't have the specific numbers on maybe the exact number of tourists that actually come here to shop, shopping is actually the number 2 item of expenditure of a tourist. So it usually is the second or third bulk item in their expenditure. And the list of expenditure is really accommodation being the top. And then there's food, and then there's entertainment and recreation, shopping, and then other miscellaneous items. But we also believe that because of the competitiveness that the VAT refund incentive scheme will bring, then it will encourage tourists to actually spend more and stay longer, which means that this will directly, while improve the growth of a local economy, also contribute to job generation. We already contribute to previously around 11% of the employment here in the Philippines. We have a lot of tourist guides, but we also have indirectly provided employment to those, let's say, in the transport sector and those other sectors that contribute indirectly to tourism. With respect to your question earlier on the
Employment, if you have
employment,
those numbers.
yes. Employment, we already contribute, around, 11%. But to the total gross value added of the tourism industries, in 2019, we already contributed 12.9% to the GDP of our country. So when the pandemic happened, our contribution is at 5.2%, and we expect this to also increase.
Let's break it down a little bit now so that we'll capture it. Do you not have any projection on how this measure can attract new tourists? Let's take 2019. Pre-pandemic levels were at 8.2 million tourists. No? I would assume that is our goal in the next few years to go back to pre-pandemic levels. But how can this measure increase the 8.2 tourists in 2019? Do you have any projections on how much we can attract?
Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, we don't have specific projections just limited to this measure. But our projections really is that we will hit the 8.2 by next year, and the added value of this measure because of the shopping tourism will just greatly contribute to, reaching the 8.2 as well as to go beyond that number, Mr. Chair.
Since you don't have that, can you just submit it to us? No?
Yes.
Because I want to capture that. This measure is about increasing tourism. So we have to know exactly how many tourists can we increase, no, in terms of this measure. We also look at the bigger picture. No? We're losing, according to the DOF, we're going to lose close to about 4 billion in terms of collection. No? So 4 billion is 4 billion. So in return to that, in return of that loss, how much can we gain in terms of additional tourists? So that's what we want to capture on record. No? So it's a very important piece of information that we need to put on record. Those are basic information.
Okay, we will come up with a study and submit it to you immediately, Mr. Chair, but also we will also try to capture the possible increase in the average daily expenditure of a tourist because of this measure.
How many countries, USEC, are implementing this type of VAT refund mechanism? Do you have that number here in ASEAN? How many countries?
Mr. Chair, in the ASEAN, we're the only one left. In the Asia Pacific, the countries implementing the VAT refund mechanism is China, Thailand, Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, Indonesia, Singapore, and Taiwan, most of which are the countries that we have identified as our top competitors.
And then, how about in, do you have a ratio of how many countries are implementing VAT refund mechanism versus how many countries do not implement VAT refund mechanism? Do you have that number?
I will also give you that number, but I think, Mr. Chair, there is also a great number of countries not providing the VAT refund scheme because it depends on the tax structure that they have, whether they actually offer the VAT in the first place or it's just a general sales tax.
Okay, but it's good to understand also, is this mechanism effective or not? No, my point there is, I want to look at other jurisdictions and how other jurisdictions are using this as a way of attracting tourists. For example, if there are countries who are not doing this but they're attracting tourists, no, I don't know which countries, then there are other important factors for tourists to consider before they come to a country, before they visit a country. So that's my point, no. And at the same time, you're right in the sense that we have to look at our competitors as well, no? Because this is our marketing tool. And our VAT is quite high, no, relative to other jurisdictions. 12% is on the high side. So giving a 12% discount on purchases is quite an attractive feature, you know, for tourists. So I just want to know, in the whole world, how many countries are implementing VAT? Are we in the minority? Are we in the majority? Do we have that study?
I think it's just a select few, really. Not all of the countries provide the VAT refund scheme, but for those who are doing it, they have already captured that market of being the premier shopping destination, aside from other things that a traveler
But I
would
think
like
we're
to
now in the minority. Most countries that I've visited, Europe, I think the entire European continent have a VAT refund mechanism. No?
Yes,
So I
Mr.
think
Chair,
we're already,
majority of the countries.
yeah. So again, just submit to us because those research is important. No?
Yes.
And that's from a marketing point of view. How are we comparing ourselves in terms of marketing promotions to other countries? No? I want to look at that also. Yes, Mr. Claudio.
Mr. Chair, may I
Yeah, go ahead
be
po.
allowed to contribute to that
Yes, yes.
information requested? We have information that we have received from global service providers. There are 69 countries worldwide that are implementing the tax-free shopping. There are 9 Asian countries that are implementing it, and we're the only Southeast Asian country that does not have the privilege. Also, one of the statistics on international tax-free shopping, 70% of travelers or tourists that travel come from emerging countries, of which shopping is a main consideration in their choice of destination. So if we will extrapolate or compute based on DOT's Department of Tourism's figure on expected arrivals, then we can do some computation to be able to arrive at how many new tourists that we can attract. Especially that people are now traveling, and not only are they traveling, they are spending, they are shopping. So we can provide, Mr. Chairman, some figures on the international scene on how the tax-free shopping is working and what figures they have, so that we can use this as maybe a pattern or a template for us to compute our own revenues that we would expect from this tax-free shopping.
Thank you, Mr. Claudio, for that information. And later on, we'll give you some time to also present those information so we can put it on record. Yusek Pamintuan, Mr. Claudio made a good point. No, when tayo lahat turista, when you make a decision on where to go, there are decision-making points. Maybe convenience of traveling, safety, ease of traveling. I want to know if DOT conducted research among tourists on what are the important factors for a tourist to consider in order to come to the Philippines. Is there a hierarchy of consideration on what tourists look at before they come to the Philippines? I want to know where shopping is in that hierarchy.
Mr. Chair, the number one consideration for a tourist really to come to the Philippines is more on the sun and beach product that we have. And after sun and beach is really on the heritage and culture. So shopping is within the top 10 of our product portfolio, but at the bottom 10. So,
What exactly is the rank
it's
in
the
order
lower.
of importance to our tourists?
It's actually the lowest for now because we do have a high VAT.
The lowest is
Rate.
in their last consideration.
It's in the last consideration, but however, based on our studies also, they still spend. It is still a top item in their expenditure. It's just that we believe that if we do remove the VAT on the goods that will not be consumed here in the Philippines, then we also believe that it will continue to go up the rank as a shopping as the primary purpose of coming here to the Philippines. But for now, the primary purpose is really more of our top products for tourism, which is really sun and beach, nature and adventure, heritage and culture.
So I guess Philippines is not even in the shopping destination map of tourists, no? If we enact this law because we're giving tools to the DOT to use in order to market the Philippines. This is actually more of a tourism marketing tool rather than a taxation issue. No? So we want to understand from the DOT how this measure can be used as a tool. No? Whether it's marketing or promotions. How do you intend to integrate this proposal into your tourism agenda?
Mr. Chair, to be honest, when we look at our top competitors, let's say Thailand or Malaysia or any other country, we do have the same top products that we offer to a traveler. So they really come there for sun and beach, for recreation, for nature, and we all have that. But the one thing that sets them apart from us is really the availability of, a better shopping portfolio as well as the VAT refund scheme. So we do believe that together with the support of the PRA and of this house is that we will be able to improve our product portfolio and to include shopping tourism as part of our strongest products in tourism.
Well, I guess it's chicken or the egg, no? Because if you want to improve portfolio, you have to attract these big name retailers to come here. But they won't come here because they know that our goods are expensive in the eyes of the tourist. No? It's additional 12%. So it's chicken or the egg. By imposing the 12%, they won't come here. But if they don't come here, we don't have a good portfolio. No? For example, the well-known high-end brands, I think, we'll hear later on. No? We have some resource persons from the retail, but my common sense will dictate that they won't come here because normally these high-end brands will target high-end people, And high-end people normally are the tourists, no? But they won't come here because they're imposed 12% in addition to their retail price. So there's a chicken or the egg scenario. So that's my observation, no? Going around different countries. So um, the next question is, aside from because we're only looking at high-end brands, eh. But in the bill, we also made a minimum purchase of 3,000 pesos. No? So if you purchase at a minimum price of 3,000 pesos, you can refund. And the intention of this is to promote indigenous and local products. No? So how can this measure, and based on your study, no, of tourists coming here, are they attracted to local products? Are they just attracted to high-end products? So, based on your study, how can this bill help our local producers and our local indigenous products? No? Because that's also one of the intention is to promote our local products to consumers. And is the 3,000 threshold um, a good amount, considering that we have to look at also our indigenous and local products are quite cheap. No? So I want to get your opinion whether the 3,000 pesos is reasonable or not.
Mr. Chair, we believe that the 3,000 peso is actually very reasonable, considering the administrative costs that the refund scheme will entail. But just to put it on record, the 3,000 is also the number that the Philippine Retailer Association has agreed to as the threshold amount, to which we would like to defer to their expertise on what the amount should really be. But with respect to the shopping tourism, based on our records, most of the expenditure would really go to the food delicacies, and second, around 40 to 50% are actually spent on local textiles and weaves. So we firmly believe that the 3,000 will actually be enough for them to encourage our tourists to spend more on our local products. And just to also point out that we think that this measure will really target those who are coming from the emerging countries. We don't really think that the VAT refund is for the high-end luxury buyers. We believe that those who come in to buy those are actually, it's just an added motivation for them to spend, but they already have the capacity to purchase those luxury items in the first place. But we think that this measure will really support our local products because it will encourage most of our inbound tourists to really spend more on our local delicacies and local goods.
Thank you, Yusek. I have some more questions, Yusek, regarding tourism, no? But I'll ask them later on so that the other resource persons can share their insights. And what's these contribution to economy, number of jobs generated, tourism expenditure per capita and as a whole. So all of these numbers are important to capture, and will please submit to us those information because again, no, we're trying to quantify the losses. Eh. So we all know that we will lose 4 billion. How much are we going to gain in terms of peso value? So, and I think Neda will probably elaborate on that later on. No? But of course, the projections, the DOT will know better because you guys have offices around the world, and you know the sentiment of our tourists. No? With that, I'll just skip the government agencies for now because we invited one of the biggest third-party refund operators in the world, no? And we're quite privileged that they agreed to join us today. And this is the Global Blue Company. I think as Pinoys, alam natin lahat yan, ano? Pinoys are very good in shopping and refund. Eh. And Global Blue is one of the most popular brands that I come across whenever I go to different countries. And I know that they have presented to the DOF, but we want to also hear their thoughts on this proposal, considering that they have presence all over the world. They have operated this refund mechanism for many, many years, and I'm sure they've seen the pros and cons of this proposal. So they're here via Zoom, and we'll call on Mr. Nathan Brown, the head of commercial Australia of Global Blue, for their thoughts, comments, and presentations if they have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In fact, it's Gavin Ingram speaking at the moment.
Mr. Ingram, sorry.
No problem. And thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the meeting today. As you mentioned, Nathan and I, 4 countries where we provide VAT refund services. We work with over 300,000 merchant stores globally, supporting those merchants in offering VAT refunds to their travellers. And certainly pre-pandemic, we were processing around 36 million transactions per annum. Across Asia Pacific, which I know is a focus for this meeting, Global Blue works on VAT refund schemes in Australia, in China, in Japan, in Singapore, as well as South Korea. And we are obviously very excited to hear about the Philippine government's intention to possibly introduce a VAT refund scheme for the Philippines. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, a lot of the countries are now moving to digital schemes, which bring great automation and great services for the merchant and for the traveller. And that is largely about encouraging travellers to shop, making it easy for the merchant to issue VAT refund transactions, but making the processes seamless and efficient as possible. So Global Blue now supports 25 countries with a digital tax-free shopping ecosystem. And we now have 11 governments around the world who are using Global Blue's customs approval system to help validate travellers' transactions when they exit the country. You mentioned Singapore, and that's a great example where the Singapore government is using Global Blue's customs validation engine to drive their tourist refund scheme. Perhaps I could just make a couple of comments, Mr. Chairman, just on some of the points you raised, particularly around the objectives for the Philippines in introducing potentially a VAT refund scheme. You mentioned about the objective to drive more tourists into the Philippines. You mentioned the importance of increasing the marketability of the Philippines as a tourist destination. And you also spoke about the importance of capturing non-resident Filipinos when they return to the Philippines to encourage shopping. Many studies have been commissioned, Mr. Chairman, around this point, because countries do need to understand what the net benefit is of a VAT refund scheme in terms of the VAT that's refunded versus the indirect benefits that the VAT refund scheme will bring. I guess the first benefit that we've seen from commission studies is that VAT refund schemes do attract more travellers to come into the country. The VAT refund scheme also attracts more more shopping expenditure as well when tourists are in country. A recent study, and I have shared this with the Department of Finance, was commissioned recently for the European Union, and that in that particular case, with the introduction of VAT refund schemes across the European Union, it was indicated that a further 5.7 billion euros was spent for general goods and services, while 6.3 billion was spent because of tax-free shopping. So it doubled the amount of spending that tourists would otherwise do in country in 2019, bringing total spending by tourists on goods and services as well as tax-free shopping to 12 billion euros. So that study in Europe, which again is available to the Department of Finance, indicated that there was a sizable increase in expenditure when a country enacted a tourist refund scheme. In 2025, our Global Blues modelling for this study in the EU suggests that spending would increase from 6.3 billion in 2019 to 8.4 billion euros in 2025 as a result of the VAT refund scheme. The growth in spending on other goods and services would go from 5.7 billion to 6.3 billion euros, going to total spending of about 14.6 billion in 2025. So the conclusion from that study is that the VAT refund scheme does stimulate additional spending on retail. It also stimulates additional spending on tourism-related goods and services. Generally, Mr. Chairman, Global Blue monitors the economic contribution of VAT refund schemes in terms of the number of jobs it creates, as well as the increased tax revenues and the increased contribution to GDP. We obviously look at the direct impact, and that direct impact is the additional employment that the tourism sector would generate, the additional GDP and the additional tax for authorities due to that increased spending of the VAT refund scheme, and we call that the direct impact. We also then look at the indirect impact, which I think the Department of Tourism touched upon, and that is it's the suppliers then who are supplying the tourist industry, who then are employing more staff to support the growth in tourism, and we call that the indirect impact. And then we have finally the induced impact, which is the increased employment in the tourism sector due to the VAT refund scheme means that those employees can then be spending their wages in the wider economy. So we add those three impacts together to understand the total impact. And particularly across the EU, we have seen that for 2019, that tourism spending stimulated or supported a further 233,000 jobs, and it contributed a further 13.9 billion to the EU's GDP. So it was a significant contributor to the economic performance of the European region, and that's why many countries around the world are looking at either implementing for the first time a VAT refund scheme or certainly modernising their VAT refund scheme, because countries, and we can now see from the data, particularly this European study, the significant economic benefit of introducing the scheme, and that far outweighs the amount of VAT that is refunded. And just on that point, again, and I'm referring here to the European study, but as a point of example, the VAT refunded in 2019 in the EU was 2.8 billion. The additional economic contribution from the VAT refund scheme was 5.2 billion euros. In 2025, the study predicts that the VAT refunded in the European Union will be 3.8 billion euros, but the economic contribution will be 6 billion euros, which clearly demonstrates there is a net positive impact for the country. Mr. Chairman, let me pause there. That's just some data. I mean, look, I'd be very happy to talk in much more detail around some of the features of VAT refund schemes, but I just initially wanted to talk to those points about the economic impacts of introducing a VAT refund scheme, and this is why more than 50 countries around the world have implemented a VAT refund scheme, as Mr. Claudio mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Mr. Gavin, since you operate globally and you have extensive experience in terms of VAT refunds for tourists, I just want to capture very basic information based on your experience. And um, you mentioned some amounts earlier, no? But those are obviously in euros, and the, the the amounts are quite staggering compared to the peso. But based on your experience, just on tourism, in terms of percentage, how much in terms of percentage, how much increase have you seen if a country implements a VAT refund mechanism? Just simple percentage increase, if there are, based on your experience, and also how much you mentioned earlier the increase in shopping, no? How much in terms of increase in shopping, again in percentage terms, um, have you seen when a country implements a VAT refund mechanism? So that will appreciate um, much more this type of mechanisms impact to tourism and to retail.
Yes, I can talk generally, Mr. Chairman. I don't have particular percentages country by country in front of me.
Just general, yeah, just
yeah.
general numbers.
Sure. I can also say, though, that obviously it differs country to country depending on who's running the scheme. I think one of the key things that Global Blue does and that we advocate for government is that it's extremely important that the country is marketed and promoted as a shopping destination. And when that occurs, and we do a lot of work in promoting countries to tourists before they depart their home country, we clearly see through that effort a sizable increase in the amount of tourist arrivals and the amount of shopping. The reason that occurs, Mr. Chairman, is because we can work directly with the merchants to put in place campaigns to drive tourists to store. And without those sort of initiatives and without I guess, a VAT refund operator putting effort into those areas, you will potentially not see a sizable increase in tourists arriving and the amount of tourist shopping. Where we have done so, we have seen figures increasing tourist arrivals from anything from greater than 10%. In terms of shopping, the contribution really does depend on how well we are promoting the scheme locally, but also the technology and support we're providing the traveller. So we do see a significant increase in what we call issue ratio, and that is the transactions that are eligible for VAT refunds, if it is well promoted in country, if the merchant is given a efficient solution to process the VAT refund transaction, that we see a marked increase in transactions being issued for VAT refund. But that does require investment in the system. It requires working with the merchants to enable them to issue these transactions very efficiently and very quickly. The other point, though, of course, is that an issued transaction is only valuable if the tourist goes through to seek the refund of the transaction. And again, where Global Blue offers support to the traveller, and that could be something as simple as allowing the traveller to self-validate their transaction at the time of exit, we see a significant increase in the amount of issued transactions that ultimately become refunded. And we can see anything from a 15 to 20% increase in issued transactions that become refunded when we deploy digital technology to guide and support the traveller through that process. So in conclusion, and let me speak generally, I think where a focus is pre-marketing of the country as a shopping destination. I think where there is a very strong relationship with the local merchants as well as the global accounts, and we provide the technology and support and services for the merchant and the traveller, you can expect to see an increase in tourist arrivals for shopping in the range of more than 10%. In terms of transactions that actually occur in country, we have seen increases of 20 to 30% of increased shopping transactions. But again, I do caveat the comment to say it really does depend on how much investment is made in promoting the country and in the technology that is deployed by the country. I think you spoke about your previous experience in the past of getting to the airport 5 hours beforehand and it being a very manual process. It doesn't really encourage the traveller to go through the tax refund process. But a digital system now where this process can be undertaken in minutes at the convenience of the traveller at the exit point is a sure way to ensure that we increase shopping in the Philippines and we encourage the traveller to actually complete the VAT refund process.
Thank you. Thank you for those basic information, Mr. Gavin. We just want to appreciate the potential of the VAT refund mechanism, considering that this will be the first time the country will be implementing. And I'm sure, well, in the bill, we also included the possibility or the authorization to partner up with third-party operators. I think the third-party operators, just like Global Blue, has extensive experience in this type of mechanism, and also the digitalization. The technology that comes with it is quite sophisticated. I've seen it in Singapore, in other jurisdictions, where passports are just scanned, and then you do it at the merchant, you do it at the airport, and then automatically it credits your credit card. So convenient, as opposed to in the past. Having said that, Mr. Gavin, I just want to ask you, what are the best practices? Okay, we're coming from zero. So what are the best practices that you've seen countries like new countries who will go into this mechanism have implemented in order to make their VAT refund successful? Successful in a sense that it attracted tourists, tourist experience have become much more, much better. So what best practices have you seen, and do you suggest that the country should implement?
Yes, it's a very good question. I think Global Blue has been operating VAT refund schemes now for over 40 years. So during that time, we've seen a significant change in how the service is delivered and what we would view now as world's best practice. As we presented to the Department of Finance, we believe that clearly the ideal tax-free shopping flow is a digital flow, as there are many benefits that come with an end-to-end digital flow. I guess first and foremost, those benefits are through digital is to ensure that we can offer great solutions to the merchant and to the traveller to participate in the scheme, and that for when they do, the process is very seamless and very, very efficient. And that's what digitalisation allows. You mentioned, for example, Singapore. Singapore now runs a completely paperless VAT refund system. And that is something that we now advocate for new countries, that they also run a paperless end-to-end digital scheme. The benefit of the digital scheme, particularly for the authorities, is much greater fraud prevention. And that is really important, and also much greater security control, because I think fraud is a key concern when you're dealing with tax revenue and payment of any sort of cash or non-cash refund. You want to ensure that fraud is minimised as much as possible, and an end-to-end digital solution allows for that much better than obviously what a much older paper manual-based process allows. So fraud prevention and security control is absolutely critical as part of an ideal digital shopping flow. The next point I would raise is that I think digital flows also allow for greater flexibility around the refund type. So now, with many travellers opting to use digital wallets to pay for their goods using digital wallets, and Chinese travellers, for example, use Alipay and WeChat Pay, that a VAT refund system can support refunds back to digital wallets. And clearly the Chinese travellers represent a significant percentage of the globe shopper. So we must have a digital system which will allow for refunds to digital wallet and other non-cash targets. In terms of the refund offered around cash and non-cash, we are basically advising countries now to allow for non-cash refunds. And the reason for that is because we can provide more flexibility in terms of refund options. An example there is where we can allow for what we call early refunds. So this is providing the refund to the traveller early whilst they're still shopping in the Philippines. And the reason for that is that would allow the traveller to continue shopping in the Philippines rather than only receiving their refund once they've left the country. Now, of course, around that concept and those services such as early refund, we need to have, and the digital system allows us to claw back that refund in the event the traveller doesn't subsequently validate their purchase at the time of exit, or the transaction is not approved by customs. But it's just one of the additional features we can now offer to encourage further spending whilst the tourist is in country. So digitalisation allows us to be more to offer better service to the traveller, but also it's good for the country because it encourages the traveller to be able to spend more whilst they are in the country. The other point now, what we're seeing for digital flows is clearly the support and service we provide to the traveller themselves. For some countries, the process of doing a VAT refund is complicated, it's cumbersome, and for a lot of travellers simply isn't worth it. They're not prepared to line up in queues. Obviously, they assess the cost of their time versus the amount of refund they're going to get back. So a key thing for us now is to ensure that as all transactions that are issued, we encourage the traveller to seek a refund. And we do that by providing digital solutions and support to the traveller, whether that's guiding them through every step of the process by reaching out to them on their mobile phone or by giving them access to apps or to ensure websites are up to date. But it's really about holding the hand of the traveller through the process to encourage them to shop when they are in country. Once they have shopped and they have purchased goods that are eligible for a VAT refund, how we then hold their hand and guide them through the process to ensure they get their VAT refund. So we want to make sure that we have a very high, what we call refund ratio in that regard. So we strive for a refund ratio of in the 90%, and we achieve that in countries where we have a digital shopping flow because we can interact with the traveller through the traveller's journey from shopping all the way through to refund as well. I think the other thing about the ideal setup now for VAT refunds is ensuring that we have a very, very clear and strong regulatory framework. And we work a lot with countries to ensure that the rules for the VAT refund scheme are clear. And what do I mean by that? If I could unpack that a little bit, it's ensuring that the rules are very clear about what goods are eligible for VAT refund. It's about being very clear on which travellers are eligible to claim a VAT refund. And I'm sure we'll speak more about that in today's meeting. It's ensuring, as you've already touched upon, that you have a reasonable and sensible minimum purchase amount that is encouraging travellers to shop when in country, but also, as you say, supporting the local and the indigenous products from local merchants. But the legal and regulatory framework also must be driven at fraud prevention, and it must also be driven at encouraging the latest technology and innovation. But that is very, very key to have a very strong regulatory foundation to support the scheme. And I'm pleased that the Department of Finance will be working on internal rules and regulations, which is about setting the rules and the framework for this scheme, because that is very, very important in order to do that. So that would be my comments, Mr. Chairman, at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. You mentioned earlier fraudulent activities. No, can you, based on your experience, because you have 40 years of experience in this, what are the fraudulent activities that you've seen? What are the loopholes that these characters exploit in order to create fraudulent activities? And of course, how do we plug those loopholes and how do we prevent fraudulent activities from happening? So we just want to understand also the downside and how this can be exploited by unscrupulous people who wants to take advantage of this system.
Yes. First and foremost, I think it comes about having very clear rules, and that those the rules for the scheme are obviously understood and enforced and built into the systems and the technology. So the first thing is detecting when a traveller may be seeking to claim a VAT refund who is not eligible to claim a VAT refund. So having a system which can detect that, and that is very important. So we control that certainly through Global Blue systems of having the traveller's passport as a document which allows us to determine whether or not this particular traveller is eligible for a VAT refund. Our systems can be connected or are connected to do checks at time of issuing around travellers who may be come from sanctioned countries, who may be on blacklists, who have committed previous fraud. So our systems can flag and detect those travellers if they are trying to do a tax refund. The second point, though, around fraud prevention is the technology which we give customs to validate the refund. So as part of that, we have a risk engine embedded into that validation system, which is completely configured by customs depending on the rules that they wish to implement. So at one extreme, Mr. Chairman, we have a risk validation system which could be configured such that customs inspect every single transaction. But of course, that would lead to long queues, frustrated travellers, and probably people then not going through the process, let alone the resourcing requirements that would require from customs. So we don't configure the risk engine in that way. So we configure the risk engine such that our system can identify high-risk transactions and low-risk transactions. So obviously the low-risk transactions are self-validated by the traveller. The traveller does not need to queue, but they have gone through a risk assessment to categorise them as being low risk. The system then allows transactions to be categorised as high risk if certain parameters and certain variables are met. Now, we have around, I don't know the precise number, but it's probably 30 to 40, maybe more, different parameters which we can configure in the risk engine to determine whether or not a transaction is considered high risk and therefore it needs to be physically inspected by customs. And that is the ultimate check, because customs can then see the traveller, view the original passport and view the actual goods that the traveller is intending to export from the country. So high risk, as an example, Mr. Chairman, a parameter could simply be value of goods. So for goods above a certain threshold, they must be inspected by customs. That's a very simple parameter. Another parameter could be certain travellers from certain countries may be classified as high risk, and therefore any traveller from that country would be required to have their goods physically inspected by customs. Now, as I mentioned, there's many different configurations here which we can apply to classify a transaction as high risk. Global Blue works with government authorities to determine what those criteria will be, but generally it's up to customs to then set what that criteria is. And that risk engine is the strongest way to help prevent fraud and detect fraudulent activity. As mentioned, our systems are connected to various watch lists, blacklists, so we can identify immediately any traveller who may have in the past been detected for fraud, so that our systems can detect that. We also at Global Blue engage dedicated fraud prevention teams, and I think that's important because fraud is ever changing, as you say, and we need to make sure that we are completely up to date and a step ahead, so we can incorporate these tools into our systems, and so when we roll them out to different governments, that they have confidence that everything is being done to detect fraud and to reduce it as much as possible. I think the most common example of fraud we probably see is where travellers are perhaps purchasing goods, but they're not exporting them from the country. And of course, the VAT refund scheme is driven around the principle that no VAT or goods are zero rated if they are not consumed in country they're exported. So a key part of the VAT refund scheme is to ensure travellers are exporting the goods from the country. So that is probably one of the main areas of fraud, and our systems are such that, again, through the risk engine, that we identify those transactions that potentially could fall within that category, being high risk, versus those transactions that are low risk. But fraud prevention and security control are probably two of the most important features of any digital end-to-end system, and it's where we probably spend the most time working with government authorities in always seeking to improve fraud prevention and security control.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin, for that information, and thank you for sharing with us your experiences in VAT refunds. We'll appreciate it if you can stay for a bit. I'll just call on the other resource persons, and if you have any more comments regarding other topics, just feel free to let us know. So thank you very much. Thank you. We'll call on the Department of Finance for their comments and also some of their thoughts on the measure. Yusek Napao.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Win. We would just like to generously express our full support for the passage of the proposed measure. Here, House Bill 7292, Senate Bill 2023, House Bill 2148, and Mr. Chair, the eventual unified bill of the House and the Senate, which institute a VAT refund system for purchases made by non-resident tourists. We confirm that we have reviewed and took into consideration the inputs of the various stakeholders, including our discussion, in-depth discussion with Global Blue. As we have, we know that there will be revenue erosion, but at the same time, we recognize that based on study, there will be an uptick in economic activities that will eventually result in a recoupment of these lost revenues in terms of economic income to the different sectors, Mr. Chair, particularly the sectors under the jurisdiction of the Department of Tourism. So, Mr. Chair, we will be open to questions. The BIR team as well as the DOF DFG team will be open to questions and clarifications in terms of how the projections were calculated, as well as on the potential procedural aspect of the refund mechanism, uh, taking also in consideration the inputs of Global Blue on how the refund will be suit in into our system of current refunds. Because as we know it, we have a very strict refund system. But the reason why this was not just uh, issued through via an executive order, but via really a legislative bill is to cure the possible hiccups or possible problems later on in terms of speeding up the refund of the VAT to these eligible tourists, Mr. Chair. So that the BIR and the DF team will be ready to address the clarifications, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Alam niyo naman kasabihan sa BIR, madaling magbayad, mahirap mag-refund. No? Yun. No, pero um, thank you for the statement of support, Yusek Napao. Just basic questions. No, I just want to put this on record so that people who will read the transcript later on will appreciate the logic why we implemented this mechanism. But before that, let me, of course, the basic is how much are we going to lose in terms of collection. You sent me a position paper, but it's good to talk about that right now. So how much are we going to lose in terms of potential amounts that we are going to lose if we implement this scheme?
Mr. Chair, our FPPO team will discuss the same, but I can mention that based on the figures that was sent by the secretary to your committee, the foregone revenue will be around 2.9 billion to 4.1 billion annually. May I request that our Director Rowena Santa Clara be recognized, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead,
To further explain.
Director Clara.
Thank you po.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. The foregone revenues ranges from 2.9 billion to 4.1 billion. The reason for the range is that in the 2.9 billion, we only accounted for the apparel and general merchandise share to total shopping, while the 4.1 billion, we accounted for the apparel, general merchandise, and grocery. So that's the difference between the two estimates.
In the overall scheme of things, no, if we're talking about a revenue of 5.7 trillion for next year, 4 billion is not so much, no, in the overall scheme of things. So that's why, but then again, billion is a billion. No? So that's why we want to understand from the DOT how can these 4 billion foregone revenues be compensated by increase in tourism intake. And later on, I'll show something that in the spending share of a tourist, no, how much goes to shopping, how much goes to accommodation, and we know that shopping is just one component of the entire expenditure of a tourist. No, I want to maybe later on I'll ask that from Neda na lang. No, I think Neda will have that breakdown. I want to understand how will let's go into the process. How will the process be? You know, will the refund be? The refund will be processed by a third party. I think that is the direction, no? And I would support that because a third party operator like Global Blue has the technology. The technology alone will take time to develop. No? And like I mentioned before, the technology that I saw in Singapore is just phenomenal. No? The experience is just amazing. You don't need to go there 5 hours anymore, maybe 2.5. No, the 30 minutes dedicated for the refund. But I've experienced it myself. No? Everything is done digitally. Even the refund itself is done digitally. So, but I want to understand how the refund internally will be handled by the Philippines. Will it be advanced to the third-party operator? Will the third-party operator come up with the initial fund for the refund? Can you describe to us some idea, no, on how the process will be, and just to give us an idea what the Department of Finance envision the process will be for the refund?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me to comment first on the craft on the provision. The House version states that it shall be mandatory because it states that it is a shall, but the Secretary of Finance prefers the version which says that it may, considering also that some jurisdictions, the government itself created the refund system. So so that we won't be just be limited to that option that we prefer third parties. May be a better language for the same, Mr. Chair, despite our bias for a third party provider, considering that the third party provider will instantly set it up without problems on capital outlay budgeting, because through the scheme they can put up the machines with the merchants, and we'll have a sort of an internal arrangement between the merchant and the provider for the cost of the setup of the machines. In terms of the how the process will be conducted, Mr. Chair, we have gone into different modes and permutations as discussed with Global Blue. But perhaps the BIR can elaborate further on this procedure. May I request that the BIR team be recognized, Mr. Chair?
Yes,
for
go
this
ahead.
purpose.
Because
Thank you
I
po.
understand under the law there's a 5% carve out, no, for refunds, correct? For VAT refunds. Yeah, will this form part of that refund, or will this be separate? Because there'll be amounts going to be refunded, di ba? So I want to understand whether a fund set up under the GAA will be used, whether the a fund being paid through the VAT will be carved out. So, or will the third party operator fund the initial refund and be reimbursed after? No? I'm sure there's so many permutations, no? But I want to understand from the BIR what are they envisioning in terms of the refund. Definitely, we need amounts to refund, no? Kasi or else we'll have a problem. No? But how do you now allocate or appropriate those amounts? No? I want to understand that.
Mr. Chair, we went into different scenarios, and in fact, one mode there is that the transaction or the remittance of the stores will be directed to the service provider. That will that scheme that scheme will probably fit into the EO scenario issuance, because it does not involve a direct refund by the government to the shoppers. But what will happen is that the merchants will remit the amount to the service provider, and the service provider will pay So the transaction will be between the merchant and the service provider. But we also look into the other scheme, which is perhaps a better scheme, where the seller will just regularly remit to the government the sales, like the usual reporting. But there will just be that component wherein they will have an additional receipt for purposes of identification that this is one of the uh, uh, purchases that qualified for refund, and this will be intended for refund. And this will be recognized by the third party's central system. And the refund will be paid by the third party provider, but the third party provider will bill the government. And that fund, the government will take out from the 5% automatic appropriation. That will be used to pay the third party. Yeah.
Right now, under the NARC Section 106, there's a 5% of the total VAT collection of the BRBOC shall be automatically appropriated annually and shall be treated as a special account in the general fund. No? So this is used for the general
Yes,
fund.
Mr. Chair, that's under Section 112 of the tax code.
Yeah.
But this one, we're specially creating is Section 112A. So, but we believe that this can be used as well for that purpose.
This 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 is a trust receipt, ano? Tama ba? Special account. It's a special account under the general fund, no?
Yes, Mr.
Tama.
Chair. There's an automatic appropriation of that 5%
Yeah.
that's ready for cash refund to.
So in other words, this will be used also for the VAT refund for tourists. It's the same. We will not create any new special account anymore.
Yeah, that comes to mind when we conceptualize the provision, but I'd like to request the BIR to reconfirm that that's still the
Reason why I'm
procedure
asking is,
for payment.
do we, number one, do we expand the 5%? Number two, do we include that in the law that we are creating now, so that it will be authorized to use it there, or there's no need because it's for VAT refunds, for general VAT refunds? No? So that's why I'm asking for the process so that we'll understand how to move forward with the law.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Because the bill proposes to include the VAT refund on tourists under Section 112. And so the 5% that we got from Section 106 provides the funding for that section, the refunds. So that would be the basis of the source of fund that we request from the DBM out of that appropriation on the 5% of total collection.
In other words, that that special account in the general fund will be the source
Yes.
for the refund. Okay.
Yes, Mr.
And,
Chair.
and the next question is, the 5% is normally that's for the mga exporters, tama?
Yes.
Now we're including tourists,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. Po.
I know sometimes this is not enough, eh. Diba? That's why there are delays, no? I think in some of the hearings, appropriations hearings, I remember that the amounts are not enough for our exporters, no? So my question is this 5% enough already for this purpose, for the tourism refund? I know the tourism might not be so big anyways, no? But nevertheless, I want to understand the computation.
Mr. Chair, if I may, effective when the train law was enacted in 2018, we were able to refund really on the 90-day period. The story about the delays was prior to the 2018, the Train Act. So fortunately, we are able to really process it and pay the refunds effective in 2018, so that we can boast about.
Do you have any surplus?
We
In that
have a
5%?
surplus, yes. The recent report from our finance service, we were told that we are not able to maximize the 5%.
So after paying all the exporters, we still have a surplus. And the
Yes,
surplus
Mr.
goes back to the general fund, no?
Uh, for for purposes of making sure that we are not being requested for to explain why we have a surplus, we the finance service only request for the exact amount that
Okay.
the offices processing these refunds will be paying off.
So, okay.
So-
But since there's a surplus, then we're quite confident that there are amounts for the tourist refunds.
Yes,
I would
Mr.
assume,
Chair.
no? I don't think the tourist refunds will be sizable naman, especially in the initial stage, no? Yeah.
Yes, Mr.
All right,
Chair.
okay. So I just want to understand the process that we already have an existing special account that we can tap into, existing source that we can tap into. Um, and then I want to also understand, in the proposal, there's a 85% refund of VAT, no? USEC. So in many jurisdictions that I've encountered, it's 100%, no? And then there's a transaction fee, no? But in our proposal, my proposal actually is 85% because the logic there is the 15% is for the transaction fees and other incidentals. But I want to understand from the Department of Finance, um, do we peg it at 100%, or do we and then have a transaction fee, or do we peg it at 85%? No? And then the remaining should be used for transaction fees and other related fees.
Sa atin,
Like for example,
Oo.
here in I just want to flash note slide 3. Here in Southeast Asia is mostly 100%. No? And then the minimum spending is varies, no? But more or less nasa 3,000 range. No? I'll just flash it on the screen. No? So I think it's better to market it that you will get your 100% refund, no? And then subject to X amount for transaction fees. No, I think that's the logic, while other jurisdictions peg it at 100%. But in some jurisdictions, I know it's also below 100%. No, so I just want to get the opinion of the DOF on this matter.
Mr. Chair, the 100% really is really not 100% since there are deductions for commissions. We are okay with the proposal 85, but that 85 will already take into account the transaction or commission fees and other fees that may be deducted from or by the service provider. It's an all-in amount, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. But I think from a marketing standpoint, I know we have some marketing. So Mr. Claudio, probably it's better to say you'll get 100% of your discount, subject to some transaction fees, no? Rather than you'll get 85%. No? I think it's a marketing message, no, so to speak. No, but at the end we get probably end up with the same amount. No, yes, Mr. Claudio.
Mr. Chairman, we agree with you on this point. The tourist deserves to get the VAT refund, the 100%, 12% VAT that we give, right? But the government has to fund the service provider. Saan siya kukuha ng pera? Mag-allocate pa? We can get it also from the tourist. That's why 85% lang ang babalik sa tourist. The 15% will be set aside by the government to pay the service provider who will administer the refund scheme. There are kiosks involved, there are people involved, there are IT involved. So there is cost to the service provider that will be charged to the Philippine government. So in the end, it's the tourist who pays for everything. He gets 85%, his 15% will be used to fund the service provider that will be contracted by the Department of Finance to administer the VAT refund. And the industry prefers it that way too, so that it's an attraction and at no burden to the government in terms of cost. No, may burden siguro in terms of manpower, supervision, but no cost. So we agree, but I think that would be more relevant in the IRR na lang. We don't have to put it in the law itself. But we say that the tourist is expected to pay the VAT first, then he gets refunded, but he gets refunded only 85%, and the 15% will be used by the DOF to pay the service provider and for administering the VAT refund scheme. That's
you.
our proposal, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you. I think it's just reasonable to charge transaction fees, whether the transaction fee is 15% or 2%, or I think it's reasonable to charge transaction fees. What I'm just playing around with in my head is the marketability. 100% is nice to say, but I think consumers are quite logical to accept transaction fees.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a couple of
Yes,
comments?
Mr. Gavin. Yeah, go ahead.
Firstly, just in terms of your slide, which I can see on the screen, I don't know whether this summary is correct for VAT refund schemes or for VAT refund to exporters. The reason I say that is because if I look at Singapore, we know the GST rate has just gone up to 8%. And the refund rate in Singapore is at least 85%. So it's not 100% refund rate. Likewise, in Thailand, the refund rate is 85% for tourists. It's not 100%. Indonesia, I am not sure of what the refund rate is for tourists. I'd need to look that up. And just to be clear for Malaysia, so Malaysia currently does not have a VAT refund scheme for tourists because the Malaysian government abolished the GST in 2018. So at the moment, there is no VAT refund scheme. But when there was a VAT refund scheme in Malaysia, the refund rate was 85% of the VAT. So certainly what Global Blue would advocate based on best practice around the world, and I think this is what Mr. Claudio was suggesting, was that the traveller pays 100% of the VAT at the time of purchase. Then at the time of refund, the traveller is refunded a percentage of the VAT. Typically, across APAC, we're seeing that number as 85% of the VAT, with the 15% being paid to the service provider, and that is paid to the service provider so they can run the scheme, but more importantly, so that they can continue to enhance the scheme and the technology. And that's really important because we are seeing such seismic shifts in the technology offering that we need to use those funds to ensure that we bring and improve the system to encourage travellers to shop and to make it easy for the merchants and to bring strong systems to the authorities as well. So we would certainly advocate for a fee being charged to the traveller. The travellers are used to that, certainly across APAC, because that's how it works across APAC. I think the only exception to that, Mr. Chairman, is Japan, where Japan runs a very different scheme called VAT off. So what that means is that the traveller never pays the VAT in the first place. But interestingly, I don't know whether your members are aware, but Japan is looking at changing that scheme because it is not the best scheme in terms of fraud prevention. So the government is currently looking at introducing a similar setup to Singapore, for example. But the The preferred approach is to charge the traveller a fee. To your question around funding for that, again, it does change country to country, but generally, Global Blue funds the payment of the VAT to the traveller, and then Global Blue would charge the tax authority for the VAT. Global Blue would be refunded 100% of the VAT. Of course, it's refunded, for example, 85% of that to the traveller, and it would retain 15% as its service fee.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Maybe you can reduce the service fee since we have our own money, since we have that 5% in the law. So um, the next will be NEDA. Will ask NEDA some of their findings on the proposal, and then we can talk about the multiplier effects of tourism. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Your Honor. Well, first, the general comment. We support the proposal to implement a VAT refund for non-resident tourists in the country, as it can increase tourism receipts and attract more tourists. Just to note as well that we have looked at the literature, and so far we have not found a study about the impact of a VAT refund scheme on tourism arrivals. I suppose because there's just many other factors that are involved. But we did find several studies that looked at the VAT refund schemes and the increase in tourism receipts, in particular in the shopping. So we also note that international tourism in particular is considered an export of services, and so for this one we need to consider ourselves as competing with our neighbors, as already mentioned by our colleague from the Department of Tourism. So since our neighbors have already implemented this VAT refund scheme, it will do well for us to do the same. So in coming up with the impact, the estimate of the impact of this proposed refund scheme for non-resident tourists, we actually looked at the tourism development plan, and in particular their projections on the tourism arrivals from 2024 until 2028. So we also assume that the proposed measure will start in 2024, and then we also looked at the in the literature that the marginal propensity to consume of tourists is set at 0.7 as a in comparison for domestic consumers, it's at 0.64. So the average spending on shopping, so we just considered shopping, by non-resident tourists was at 9,311, and this is the average from 2016 until 2021. And then, so given this, and we also assumed that the VAT refund will be a source of additional income for the non-resident tourists, and then a portion of that, in particular 0.7 of that, will be used to spend on retail goods in the country. So in terms of the multiplier, we looked at the multiplier of the retail trade sector. So the counterfactual is that government will be keeping that VAT revenue, and it will also be subject to a multiplier effect of government spending, which in terms of the recent GAA is at 1.38. So in terms of the retail trade, the multiplier is 1.43. And we also assume further a VAT collection efficiency rate of 40%. So with those assumptions, the additional spending is per annum will be between 6 billion and 9 billion from 2024 to 2028 for the full refund, for the 100% refund. And then the foregone revenue, or sorry, the estimated the status quo will be revenue sana of 3.4 billion to 5.1 billion. Now, in terms of applying the multipliers, then under the full refund scenario, the gross value added, so addition to the GDP, will be 8.6 billion to 12.8 billion annually from 2024 to 2028. And then the counterfactual is from between 4.7 billion to 7.1 billion. And so the difference between the refund scenario versus the status quo is 3.8 billion to 5.7 billion. So meaning it will really generate additional activity. And uh, again, the caveat being that we did not yet consider that this may still increase tourism arrivals. We leave it up to the Department of Tourism how they can include that in their promotional campaign. And for this reason, Mr. Chair, we are fully supporting this VAT refund mechanism. Thank you.
So you said, just to summarize um, your comments, is we will see additional spending in shopping by about 6 billion to 9 billion.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and then in terms of, do you mentioned earlier contribution to
The GDP,
yeah, contribution
including
to,
the multiplier,
yeah.
so that will be between 8.6 billion to 12.8 billion annually.
And do you have in terms of um, in terms of the share of expenditure of a tourist, do you have that number? For example, if a tourist comes here, it spends, let's say, $1,000. Where does it go? How many percent of those goes to, let's say, accommodation, to food, to shopping, etc.? Do you have that breakdown so that we will appreciate how much a tourist allocates to shopping?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We actually the Philippine Statistics Authority has been compiling what we call the tourism satellite accounts. So from this, we note that about 30% is spent on accommodation services. Food is about about 16 to 20%. And then you have transport services is still a big share, about 13%, and but recently it has increased to 20%. Travel agency malit lang, it's less than 0.5%. Tapos for the shopping itself, it's at 12%. It's almost the same as yung sa recreation, entertainment and recreation activities. And then we have the catch-all miscellaneous activities, which over time has actually diminished to about mga 1.6%, Mr. Chair.
In other words, even though we forgo the VAT on shopping, which is 12%, we will gain from accommodation, which is a bigger chunk. We will gain from food, which is 16%, transportation, 13%. So in other words, we lose VAT on shopping, but we gain VAT on other components, especially accommodation. No, that's 30% of the expenditure of a tourist. No, and food is also a big chunk, which is 16%. No? So the offset siya, in other words. No.
Mr. Chair, and to note as well that it has a higher multiplier effect than government spending.
Okay. The tourism has a higher. What's the multiplier effect? That's
1.43.
1.43.
The estimate, yeah.
okay. In the DOF, it's 1.9. Eh.
Mataas ka naman siya.
No, so, so I was hoping it's 1.9. No? So, yeah, but it's here in the DOF. No. Between 1.4 to 1.9, let's put it that way, no? So that we meet halfway. All right. All right. So thank you for that, Yusek. And how much has tourism been contributing to our economy? 2019, pre-pandemic level. No? I want to put on record the significance of tourism as a sector or as an industry in terms of contribution to, number one, to our economy, number two, to employment. No?
Pre-pandemic, Mr. Chair.
We
Uh,
have to use 2019 because obviously 2020 is an aberration, no, because of the pandemic. So 2019 is a more accurate benchmark for tourism.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Uh, for 20 pre-pandemic, tourism actually accounts for about 12%,
So it's a
12.6%.
sizable chunk of our economy.
Yes, and that's also the share in employment. Yeah.
Yeah. Alright. Yes, go ahead. You said.
Yeah. Just to add as well that for this additional GDP that is generated by this added spending, we would be adding about in terms of employment nasa mga 5,000 to 6,000.
5,000 to 6,000 new jobs. All right. All right, Isaac. Thank you for those information. We'll go to the other resource persons because we invited some resource persons from the private sector. We're here joined by Mr. Covaderi of the store specialist. Is there any comments um, on the proposal? Since store specialist, as we all know, is one of the oldest, most established high-end retailer in the country, and the aim here is to improve um, retailing volume being consumed by tourists. So, any comments, sir?
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and everyone. Thank you for inviting us here. We welcome this proposal 100%. It really will help promote selling more of goods, whether if it's high-ended brands or local. I think mostly it will be local that's going to benefit from this. So we definitely welcome this proposal at the private sector.
Based on your experience, we were talking about earlier, I think it was Yusek Pamintuan, about attracting foreign brands to set up shop here. You know? And I mentioned it's a chicken or the egg question. So can you give us some of your experiences in terms of attracting brands? I know Store Specialist is a company that have several brands, no? Typically high-end brands. So can you tell us your experience in terms of getting these brands here? How these brands react in terms of um, our VAT rate, no? Because I know that we're one of the highest here in the region. And then what do they suggest in terms of improving um, the shopping consumption of our tourists? No? So those experiences, can you share with us?
Mr. Chair, as far as the principals or brands coming to the Philippines, they really don't factor the VAT. That's something it's individual to each country. But what makes it attractive for them to come here is tourism. If tourism is pretty high, the numbers are high. 2019 was a really banner year for us at 8 million, over 8 million. So they really do consider tourism, especially when it comes to location, where the location is going to be or the location of the stores are going to be. But VAT is not something that they get involved with, based on our experience.
Do you have any suggestion on the process? Of course, the customer experience is very important, no? And what we want is a seamless experience for our shopping for our consumers, no? So, do you have any suggestion on how to make it seamless, as easy as possible for our shoppers, especially tourist shoppers?
I do believe that the direction that everybody is taking, which is a third party, like Global Blue, I experienced the same thing you experienced in Singapore. What a wonderful experience. So seamless. It's just, like you said, even 30 minutes is too long to give for that. Took only a few minutes, and I was done. So definitely a third party would be our suggestion, our recommendation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll call on Mr. Claudio, sir. I know you have a presentation or any comments to the matter.
Well, basically, thank you, Mr. Chairman, first for the invitation to this hearing. I will not dwell anymore on the economic impact and benefits. I think we all agree on the benefits that this one, so it will shorten the issues. There'll be some issues that I'd like to bring up in the discussion of the bill itself. But basically, the Philippine Retailers Association has been wanting to make Manila the shopping destination in Asia. We had a shopping destination campaign in 2007 and then another one in 2015. Apparently, the promotion was there. We were supported by the Department of Tourism when we did that, but we didn't get much good experience on it. And basically, we found out that we were one of the countries in Asia that didn't have the VAT refund. And when you're talking about making a country or a city a shopping destination, then a VAT refund really is a big factor. So we support this because we've been wanting to, and we would like to revive. And we are sitting down with the Department of Tourism now to USEC Shireen here to mount again, to make Manila the shopping destination in Asia. Singapore, Hong Kong have lost their luster already as a shopping destination. So where are they going? They're going to Thailand, they're going to even Indonesia or Malaysia. So it's about time that we not only be attractive, we must be competitive. And this will bring us to that competitive level to the other Asian countries. On the issue of the loss of revenue, the industry, the retailers who've been there, never had that benefit of getting foreign consumption because of our lack of VAT refund. So we felt, I think the government did not lose much because never gave that opportunity in the first place for many years. There are also issues and studies from other Asian countries. If shopping is a choice of a consideration for a choice of destination, then shopping comes second biggest expense item of that tourist. His first is lodging, of course, hotel, airfare. Shopping is their next because they really travel purposely to shop. So the resorts, the tourism aspect comes 3, 4. But shopping is a second expense item. So we would not want to lose out on that. As I said earlier, people are traveling already. There's a travel revenge, they call. And not only are they traveling, they're shopping. So by bringing out this VAT refund scheme for tourists as early as we can, will put us in a very competitive and attractive stage. Yes, we've been using that as a marketing tool, and we would like to continue on that. And as I said, your concern, Mr. Chairman, now, chicken or the egg, hindi na problema yon. we have all the major luxury brands here in the Philippines. So for those who wants to buy watches, signature bags, signature apparel, they're all here. So there's no longer an issue of whether a tourist will come because whether he can buy or not. We have them. Store specialist is one, and among many others. All the major expense item of a foreign tourist when he does international shopping, we have the brands, and we have the malls too. So parallel to that, we have the best beaches in the world. So after shopping, they can enjoy themselves. Uh, we also would like to participate, especially in the fraud control part of the implementation of the VAT. Uh, Retailers will have to be accredited. I don't think the Department of Finance or BIR will want everybody to just simply say, I sold a Rolex watch in Echangge, I bought a Rolex watch in Echangge, the fake, and then go to the airport and say, I bought a real watch, give me a 12% rebate on 150,000. So there has to be some sort of accreditation because we need to make sure that the government is not defrauded of the proper revenue. We also want to contribute on the implementation. The industry is not in favor of a direct deduction on the retail level because we feel that's where the fraud will be encouraged. Um, all VAT collections should go to the government, definitely. Then the refund process is just simply picking from that fund that was received. We don't want to be giving VAT refund to stores who didn't even collect a VAT in the first place. So, nalugi na yung gobyerno, nadaya pa. So, these are the support that we'd like to give to the government in the proper implementation of this VAT refund. We will help out in the store accreditation. We will be able to pick out which retailers we feel will be dubious or which ones are reputable to extend.
Point, Mr. Claudio, in fact, I was going to ask the DOF. I understand in some jurisdiction there's an accreditation process of the retailer. Just playing devil's advocate. In the Philippines, accreditation takes time. We're all we have phobia being accredited by government, because it takes time, and again, it is an opportunity for corruption. I was actually thinking of just registration. You register and that's it. So I just want to get your opinion, Mr. Claudio. Will a registration process be much more appropriate rather than an accreditation? A registration meaning I'm a retailer, I go to the DOT or to the DOF, I register, and that's it. That's the same. Uh, uh, we're just reversing the process, so that the process will be faster, and then there's no more period to wait whether you will be accredited or not. So just to get your opinion on that.
Agreed, Mr. Chairman. Of course, the registration should just simply ease it. But who's going to vet whether that registration is pwedeng aprubahan o hindi? Echangge owner in Green Hills, I'm sorry if Green Hills representatives are here, and says, I want to be registered as a VAT refund, and he's selling fake watches or fake shoes. Will the government agency be able to vet and say, pwede yan hindi pwede? So, depends on the registration process, I guess. There has to be a vetting. That's exactly why we want it to register. So we give only the benefit to those who are really helping in collecting VAT revenue and helping the government earn revenues. So there may, I'm sorry, but there are retailers that are scrupulous, that do not have that kind of reputation. So registration may not be enough. There has to be a vetting entity, whether it's the government or with the support of the private sector. Pwede rin.
But I'm just thinking making it easier for. So I was going to also ask about indigenous products and local products, no? And for example, most local products will be mom and pop shops, eh? No? And we were thinking of making it easier for them to join in the VAT refund program, no? Making it less tedious for them, no? So that if I'm a mom and pop shop, no, selling indigenous goods, I will just register with the DOT or the DOF, no, depending on how this goes, and then I can already participate in the VAT refund process. So I have two questions, Mr. Claudio. Number one is, how do we further promote local products? Because I really want to uh, give special attention to local products, no? Of course, the name brands like store specialist brands will be there. They're global brands, but I can see also good opportunity to promote local products, no? I know store specialist also promotes local products, no? But there are also mom and pop stores that we need to accommodate and help them join in the bandwagon of this VAT refund scheme.
We support that, Mr. Chairman, very, very wholehearted. There's only one rule. You should be able to show it at the airport. So kung kinain mo na at food, there's no way to prove that you bought it and you paid VAT on it. That's not allowed. Hindi pwede yung ship, airplanes, big items, or any item that's shipped by freight, because we don't know whether somebody just wants to take advantage of our VAT refund, pero it's actually for commercial consumption. But other than that rule, any Philippine product could be VAT refunded for so long as you can show it at your exit. Kasi we will never know whether that item was bought by a local and he asked a tourist, ibili mo naman ako, pero para sa akin yan. So we deprive the government of the proper revenues naman. So I guess that can be addressed in the IRR, Mr. Chairman. Yes, but we do support. Wala na dapat, even if mga indigenous products, cottage industries, MSMEs, for so long as they bought in the Philippines, the minimum may be an issue here. Kasi nga, that will have to be taken into consideration. But otherwise, any Philippine-made product should also be VAT refundable.
Other jurisdiction, I saw food is not part of the VAT refund.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Chairman, kasi there's no way to determine whether you really bought it and a VAT was paid for it. So if I bought dried mangoes and said, I bought it, I paid so much, so give me a refund. Pero when I asked to show it, nakain na pala. Or we don't know kung binili talaga o kinain. Ano. So that's the simple rule on the VAT refund. Unless you can show it at your exit, you may have given that benefit to a local, which is a fraud, or you never really did pay VAT, but you're claiming for a VAT refund.
Important is the exit point. I think in many jurisdictions, there are two steps. No, you go to the customs, you show the goods, and then you show the receipts, and then you go to the third party to get your refund. No, I think
Correct.
there's a two-step process. I think in Singapore now it's one step. I think the customs and the refunder or the third party is in one area. I remember that. No, I was recently in Singapore. That's why I remember. No.
That's no longer a problem, Mr. Chairman. Our concern there is the law specifies the foreigner has 60 days to bring out the items as part of the requirement. However, the DOT has also a rule that a tourist can stay 90 days. So there may be a conflict. So before the final wordings of the law is effected, we'd like to recommend that we reconcile that. Either we go 90 days or 60 days. Because If a tourist is allowed to stay 90 days, but he has to bring out the product in 60 days to be within the law, that means lalabas pa siya, tapos babalik na naman siya. Or if he doesn't bring it out in 60 days, he is violative of the law. Diba? So, can we input that, Mr. Chair?
That's a good point that you made. Actually, in some of the jurisdictions, they allow 90 days
Yeah.
in some areas.
Well, let's align na lang with the DOT's 90 days.
Yeah,
They allow 90
we'll
days.
seek
so
guidance from
the D-
the DOT and the DOF on that. No? But the standard that we've seen is 60 days. That's the standard. But I've seen some areas where they allow 90 days.
90 days.
Yeah.
The other, Mr. Chairman, is part of the wordings of the bill is the unclaimed refund should be remitted to the government. I think this may be out of place because there is no VAT refund that will go to the service provider. All VAT payments will go to the government. None will go to the service provider. So maybe that should be looked into to make sure na that is not an area for fraud too.
Admittedly, this is actually, I asked my staff before the hearing. Admittedly, this is being what was being contemplated here. There's government will allocate the fund, and then from that fund we will draw the refund, and then the unclaimed will be put back to the general fund. No? So, but there's so many. I understand now. There's so many
Iteration.
permutations. In fact, Global Blue can advance the
Well,
amount.
that's usually the procedure now.
Yeah.
You have already the 5% that's set aside because the government received all the VAT on all transactions. May 5% na pagkukunan. It's the service provider who now releases initially the refunds to the tourist. And then the service providers files a statement weekly, monthly to collect from the government what they said they refunded. We are also not in favor of direct refunds by retailers in the stores, yung outright, because I'm sure the government may have difficulty tracking that. Was there really a VAT paid? Di ba? Kasi kung outright, that means the government didn't even receive the VAT. Went straight. So there is that provision too that should be monitored closely. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, we're all out and we would be supporting the DOF and the DOT on this project, and we are very confident that it's going to boost our tourism. We are already starting to get inquiries from our other retail association in the region, and we're sharing information on how we can benefit from this. And it's not just the marketing part of it that we should be concerned. Should be concerned on the trickle-down benefit to the economy of what this will bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Claudio. We'll call on Mr. Neri of MCIAA.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for inviting me to this hearing. First, may I say from the Mactan Cebu International Airport Authority, we more than 100% support this proposal. We think it is about time, and we think it will make our country more competitive with regards to getting more tourists. From the airport's point of view, of course, the most critical thing is the customer experience. So for as long as we are using all of the most modern technology, as the chair has mentioned, I've also been in Israel this year and Dubai. Likewise, a two-step process, very easy. There's a list of items which you need to show, mostly jewelry. Other items, there's no need to show them. No? So you go to the first checkpoint, you get partial refund, then you show the other items to get the rest of your refund. No? So as long as the process is similar, it should not be a problem because there will be enough space, at least in our airport, to put all the facilities in place. No? Listening to the rest of the discussion, I have other also inputs I would like to share. Firstly, with regards to the registration and or accreditation process, I agree with the chair that it has got to be seamless and not take too much time. Having said that, it should also be an opportunity to encourage the retailers, especially of our local industries, to level up their services. No, we are always a lot of tourists, go to certain tourist places, and they experience getting fooled, di ba? They bought something else was given, the quantity is less, it's broken or something, and there's no way to return it. No? So with the accreditation process, hopefully it will minimize the effects, no, of these negative effects, which would give our country a bad name. Also, I think with regards to encouraging the small cottage industries to participate in the VAT refund process, one solution could be for some areas, you put all of these small industries in one changi, and the whole changi becomes the place which is accredited. So there's some form of control, no, and some form of standard that is set. Also, in my mind, I would just humbly suggest that maybe we can also study the minimum amount, because right now we're pegging it at 3,000 pesos. Um, it might be possible to raise it to say 5,000. This would do several things. Number one, it would probably reduce a bit the number of transactions. That means less queuing in the airports. It would also maybe reduce, temporarily the losses from the DOF. And also it would really encourage people, because a lot of tourists, when they come here and they buy items relatively cheap, they buy in bulk. So it will encourage more bulk buying. So maybe we can start with that, and if it does not work, we can always reduce the amount in the future. If it will just be in the IRR. So just my humble suggestions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Mr. Neri, I was going to ask also Mr. Ko, no, for MCIA. The airport will play a very big role, no, in this process. No? In many, actually all jurisdictions, the refund happens at the airport. No? And
Yes, sir.
I would like to get your opinion whether our airports are ready, they have the space. I think ready is easier, no? But do they have the space to process this type of refunds in their areas?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I cannot speak for the other airports in the country, but I can say that at Mactan Cebu International Airport, we are ready and we do have the space to implement this.
It's different. No? My experience is different. Some airports, they put it at the very end, and it's a small place. No, so sometimes the tourists. I think that's in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. No? That's in Rome, if I'm not mistaken. One of the European countries, and I remember it was very crowded. No, so because it's crowded, people are confused, no? Because they come from all over the place. Some people cannot speak English, some people can speak English. So I know our airports are growing very fast. Foot traffic is also growing very fast. So my concern is, will our airports, particularly Cebu, because Cebu is one of the busiest airports in the country, will you have the space to put, let's say, a refund mechanism where you have the customs there, the third-party operator there? Will space be a constraint for our airports?
Mr. Chair, in Cebu, we will find and make the space and give it as utmost priority. We have already initially discussed it with the terminal operator, and we are all of one mind that we will support this proposal 100%.
Thank you for that assurance, GM. I'm very bullish with Cebu. Cebu is known as the tourism haven of the country, or one of the tourism havens, and getting a support from the general manager speaks a lot, no? Because we want to make it as seamless, as best experience as possible for our tourists to claim the refund when they're at the airport already.
Yes, thank you, sir.
We'll also hear the comments of Mr. Brian Ko of MCIAA.
From MIA, Chair, Senator Win.
MIAA.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. So for the MIA, sir, of course, we also share our full support for this endeavor, sir. It will just improve, of course, our country as a destination of choice for the travelers, and we continue to open our borders so that we can reach that target of surpassing our 2019 figures. In fact, last year we already welcomed around 30.9 million passengers in MIAA, Manila airports. This year, we are projecting to end at 43 million, and by next year, sir, we project that we will already surpass the 2019 figure of 47 million passengers processed in our NAIA terminals. So in terms of the projections of the different agencies, we are aligned, sir, in terms of achieving that return to pre-pandemic levels by next year, and we are actually excited to have these kinds of programs to further enhance our capacity to attract more foreigners and tourists into the country. One of the things that we will be supporting, of course, and getting information on would be the space allocation, which will be very important, given that some of our terminals have very limited space as of now. But at the same time, there are several solutions on how to do this, such as, of course, employment of technology. As you've detailed earlier, there has been a big evolution in terms of doing the refunds from the past, where they require bigger spaces because transaction was longer. But nowadays, because of technology, this becomes more convenient and efficient for both the operator as well as the passengers that are going through the airports. So we would like to stress that the digital system should be in place. And of course, it's a very efficient and convenient process, as you mentioned a while ago, so that we can increase the throughputs of our airport as we still wait for the other expansion of our government, such as the other airports that will serve the GCR area, like Bulacan and Sangli Point. But in the meantime, as we also embark on the enhancements of NAIA, we will incorporate these plans in Mr. Senator, so that we can already support the endeavor of this government to promote more tourist arrivals into the Philippines. And apart from that, sir, we will be more than willing to support all of the activities that will contribute towards a successful rollout of this endeavor, sir.
Well, to MCIA and to MIAA, may I request to already commence the studying of the space. No? This has been transmitted by the House to the Senate, so that means the House approved it. The DOF and all the executive agencies showed and expressed their support to the bill, so I don't see any problem here, no, in the Senate. So in other words, once we implement this bill, once we approve this bill, it will be given to the airports to carve out a space, make sure that the flow is convenient. I know airport operations is quite complicated. No, you have the check-in counters and all of that. So would like to request from the operators, airport operators, to already start studying this. No, hopefully hopefully we can implement this within the year. No, if we get this approved, and full blast implementation by next year. No, so we've been talking about experience, no? And the last long-lasting experience will be at the airport. No, once they claim the refund. No, so it's either they're gonna hate us or they're gonna love us. No, so where the experience will be at the hands of General Neri and MCIAA. So we would like to seek your cooperation in terms of looking for that space and improving the flow and experience of our tourists. All right, so other government agencies who are here with us will be the Bureau of Customs. Any comments? Andito ba BOC? Yeah. Attorney Dabu.
Morning, Mr. Chair. For the Bureau of Customs, we interpose no objection to the subject measure and gives its assurance that in the event of its passage, the Bureau shall give effect to the provisions of the VAT refund system for non-resident tourists. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead,
May
Mr.
I?
Claudio.
I
Yes, go ahead
just
po.
forgot one important item which I think should be presented to this hearing today. We need to redefine who is a tourist. Uh, the original definition as specified in the Senate bill specified here is for foreign passports holders. We are concerned that we may be depriving OCWs, Filipino expats abroad working, and even balikbayan who are no longer, who are still holding Philippine passports. So, sayang naman yun. OCW, if he wants to come and wants to bring gifts to her family, pwede niya niyang bilhin dito and take avail of the VAT instead of buying it in Dubai or other Middle Eastern countries or European countries where they came from. So let's give them the benefit too. Now, by defining a tourist as a foreign passport holder, mawawala sila sa scene. So I'd like to present this to the committee to, if we can review the definition so that we can include OCWs, Filipino expats, balikbayans who are still holding Philippine passports. Kasi parang dito sa definition na foreign passport, basta Philippine passport holder ka, hindi ka pwede. Which I think we are not giving respect naman to our Filipino expats who are still holding Philippine passports but are no longer residents of the Philippines.
Thank you for that. In fact, we had an internal discussion about that, no? OFWs, OCWs, expats, no? Who come here, take a vacation for a short time and go back. Although we need to study this very carefully, because there might be loopholes, no? For example, how do we control an OFW buying a lot of goods and then at the airport claiming for those goods, but we don't know if they will actually leave the country or not, no? So that's one. I'm not saying no, but I'm just saying we're just brainstorming internally. How do we put measures? No, a foreign tourist will. The probability of a foreign tourist leaving is close to about 90%. No, but of course the OFWs will have families here, and they'll be encouraged to buy more for their families. But how do we assure whether those goods being bought will be brought back or will be shipped out of the country? No, that's one of the things that we have to
The
think
number
about.
one rule applies, Mr. Chairman. Kailangan ilabas nila.
Yes.
So if they want to exercise the VAT refund, do it on their way out,
yes.
not on their way in.
In some jurisdictions, I noticed they practice honesty system, or they practice random inspection. No, in honesty system, baka might be complicated for us to implement. The random inspection, I've seen that in some areas. No, they don't. I think in Singapore they practice. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gavin, but I think in Singapore they practice random inspection. Because I was inspected, my girlfriend was not inspected. So I don't know why. No? But so I think they practice some form of random inspection. So my point there is, if it's an OFW, no, we don't know if that OFW will be inspected or not, no, and the probability of OFW buying for other people is also quite high, no. So we need to think about that. I'm not saying no, but we need to make sure that it will not be abused by unscrupulous people, no. Ms. Belen, are you raising your hands or, you know? Yes, Mr. Neri.
Yeah,
Neri.
Mr. Chair, I think it's a matter of pick your poison. You know, there's always people who will try to get around the rules. A possible way, and if we implement things very strictly and ask everyone to show everything, you'll have lines that are very long. So a possible way to maybe mitigate a little bit is to have one line for Filipino passport holders, another line for foreign passport holders. It might be, some people will still complain. No matter what, the people will complain. But we have to find a way to minimize the lines, at least for the real tourists, because we want to give them a good experience. So we have to discuss, pero talagang pick your poison, or we just let go the small quantities. No, but really look at the big ones. You have to show everything. So we have to find the correct balance. That's just my opinion, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm not the man closing the doors on that. No, we just need to study it very carefully. We need to also study whether the other jurisdictions allow, or if foreign worker, their own citizens who are expats, no, who are working abroad to claim VAT refund. I have not come across that in our research, but if you have any information regarding expats allowed to do refunds, we can study that carefully. You know? Of course, the other experience will be customs. In many, not many, in all jurisdictions, you have to go through customs. No? What I noticed lang is some practice honesty. They ask you lang, where is the items in your luggage, and they let you go. Some practice random checking. You know? So that's something that we need to study here in our country. But I want to ask customs, what do they envision? Do we do random inspection? Do we inspect everything? Of course, if we inspect everything, that will create a lot of bottlenecks, no? And the waiting time will be longer. But what's your suggestion in terms of implementing this VAT refund system?
For Mr. Chair, for purposes of determining the proper classification and valuation of the products that the tourists will bring outside of the Philippines, it is for the inspection, though it might create long lines.
Envision individual inspection or random inspection or honesty system? What do you what do you suggest?
Mr. Chair, maybe we can just set an amount in the IRR on kung mga makeup lang naman yan, di na siguro kailangan inspectionin pa. But if you're bringing out a Rolex watch or a Louis Vuitton bag na expensive and you're asking for a refund, you have to make sure na talagang deserving ka for that VAT refund. So maybe we can set an amount in the IRR na lang on that.
Well, in the same manner, yes, Mr. Gavin, do you wanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, let me just talk about, just very quickly, best practice in this area. Firstly, we don't believe that a good system is a system which relies on random inspection. We believe a good system is one which has a proper validation system which contains a risk engine. So if I look at Singapore is not randomly selecting which transactions to inspect. Every single transaction is assessed through the risk engine. And as I said, there can be multiple criteria to then determine which transaction is low risk and which transaction is high risk, which then warrants physical inspection. To give you some figures, in general, we would probably, through a risk engine, physically inspect 10% of transactions, with 90% of transactions not being inspected, in other words, being viewed as low risk. Now, the risk engine can be calibrated to change those percentages, of course, such that you could inspect a lot more transactions because you deem them as high risk. And that's the beauty of a well-tuned validation risk assessment engine. It certainly takes away the risk of purely random, because things will leak through the cracks if it's random. You want every transaction to be assessed, but it's making sure you have that risk engine configured such as it's only high risk that you are identifying. And we work a lot now with customs in helping guide them about what we're seeing in other countries and how those risk parameters should be configured. But as I mentioned earlier, it's always customs who control what that risk engine, how it should be set up and what it wants to identify. So coming to your question about OFWs, for example, there you can ensure that you validate the transaction on airside, which means that obviously the Filipino passport holder is clearly leaving the country because they've already gone through immigration and they are on airside, so you are sure they are leaving the country. And then ensuring that they have the goods with them. Again, we can look at the profile of the traveller through the system about where they purchased the goods from, because the system is connected to the merchant. You can look at the value of those goods. You can look at the quantity of those goods. And again, based on certain risk parameters, we will be able to identify if a high risk transaction is taking place by an OFW, for example, which would warrant inspection. So the news here is that the technology has evolved significantly to help prevent fraud, but to ensure we are driving efficiency at the airport, so it's a good experience for the traveller. And that's the beauty of, I guess, an outsourced operator who is investing every day in improving this risk assessment engine to ensure that high-risk transactions can be identified and inspected, but then low-risk transactions, that traveller can have a quick and seamless process through the airport.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Do you know any jurisdiction wherein they allow expats or their own citizens to claim VAT refund? Those who are leaving.
Yeah, Australia is one of them. There are other countries that allow, I don't have the list to hand, but there are other countries who allow non-residents to claim, and that's the test. And I think that's why Mr. Claudio was suggesting perhaps removing the reference to foreign passport holder, and the true test is non-residency. So because a non-resident is exporting the good from the country. But there are other countries who allow for expats to claim, and in terms of our proposal of best practice to government, we now encourage that the government allows for expats to claim under the VAT refund scheme as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gavin. We'll call on the OTR. I think the OTR is here. Attorney Leliave.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. We'd like to manifest our general support for the objectives of the subject measures. We understand that such refund scheme would aid in enticing more tourists to visit our country and spend here. As such, the DOTR will coordinate and cooperate with the concerned government agencies and entities in removing impediments to the refund process. As you said, with the space in airports, being that the DOTR has supervisory and regulatory power, we would coordinate with the airport authorities, the airport operators, to find a way to maximize the space and make it as convenient, safe, and painless as possible for tourists, and also in case of our OFWs to refund the VAT. In any case, we will be submitting our detailed position paper as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney. We'll call on BSP.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Any comments?
We do not object the legislative measures which aim to boost the tourism industry. And we note, Mr. Chair, that this will be implemented through tax-related measures. And in this regard, we defer to the valuable inputs of other relevant institutions here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Bureau of Immigration, represented by Attorney Maminta.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Attorney.
For the Bureau of Immigration, we are in full support of the pending bills. However, would like to make a point because the experience we would like to have is for the travelers from beginning to end. And as everybody knows, our issue with immigration is the long queues. So if ever the impetus to drive is for increase the number of warm bodies going in and out of the country. So we would really love to know if how the projection of how many are we expecting, so that for our part, the Bureau of Immigration can prepare in consonance with the aim of both of our terminals here, Your Honor.
Thank you, Attorney. Attorney, I don't know if you will have this information, but how many dual citizens does our country have? I don't know if it's with the
I do not have
BI
the exact
or
numbers with you
DFA.
right now with me, Your Honor, but the trend is really increasing.
Yeah.
The,
Is that
the,
with the BI or the DFA, that
the
information?
Bureau of Immigration, Your Honor, and we also have consulates abroad who processes dual citizenships.
Figure, hundreds,
I
thousands?
I will submit the
Yeah,
figure.
please submit to us because those are, we all know that dual citizens visit the country more frequently, no? Because they have relatives here, and compared to tourists, I mean, no? So that's also another segment that we want to attract to come to the Philippines more often. No?
Yes, Your Honor. Noted po.
Any did I call everyone? DBM, any comments from DBM?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. We also manifest our support to this bill, and we defer to the DOF on the revenue implications of the bill. Thank you, sir.
Right. Any comments from the body? If you have any more last comments, Yusek Napao, Yusek Rose, if you have any more comments, or to DOT, Yusek Mamintuan, any more comments? Kung meron kayong mga last comments that you want to share, or to Assistant Commissioner Belen, any more from the BIR?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We just would like to include the Department of Tourism in Section 2 on the implementing rules so that we can be in consultation with them when we provide the IRR for this. And maybe the OTR because, as I heard, they have the regulatory power over the airports.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We'll include that in the crafting of the IRR. Right. Okay. Any more question? Any more comments po? Hearing none, please submit to us your position paper, especially from DOT. We need projections on how this bill can help drive the growth of our tourism sector, especially that we want to bring it back to pre-pandemic levels. Admittedly, we're still quite far off. Hopefully, we can hit it within the year. But if not, this is another tool that can drive our tourism sector back to on its feet. And would like to thank Mr. Gavin of Global Blue for sharing with us his thoughts on the proposed measure. And Mr. Gavin, if you can give us some more information regarding global best practices, some statistics, some data, we'll be more than happy to receive it so we can include that in our report.
I will do, Mr. Chairman. Can I just raise just one more comment
Yes, go ahead.
for the record? And it's just something to think about. And again, Mr. Claudio has sort of mentioned this, but on the definition of tourist, Mr. Claudio made the point about the reference to foreign passport holder. A further comment, though, is we don't regularly see the definition having a linkage to trade or business. Why do I say that? Because we often see a lot of shopping occurs by travellers entering the country for business purposes. It might be a short visit for 3 or 4 days, for example, whereas part of their visit they do shopping and they also claim the VAT when they depart the country. So I think it's just worth having a think about the inclusion of those words, not engage in trade or business, because that may mean that a genuine person coming for a few days business would be precluded then from participating in the VAT refund scheme. And we generally see that segment being a strong contributor to shopping. They like to come and do business for a few days, but they also like to shop as well. So just something for the committee to think about as well.
Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Gavin. In fact, yesterday, internally, we decided to remove that provision. You're absolutely correct. No, like for example, I made an example yesterday while brainstorming that we get a lot of foreign consultants for ODA funds to come here, and a lot of them come here few days, maybe a week. But I also noticed that they go out shopping. They go out shopping. They go out enjoying the countryside. A lot of these consultants also want to get to know the country on a deeper manner, and that includes shopping. So you're absolutely correct. Thank you for pointing that out. Well, we actually agreed to remove that provision already, so that it will not be limiting to people coming in the country. All right. So with that, if there are no more comments, thank you very much for your time. We'll go into a technical working group next week. We'll inform you of the date and time. But thank you very much for sharing with us your insights on the proposed measure and your support. I think this is a good measure that will drive tourism back on its feet. Hopefully pre-pandemic levels or even surpass the pre-pandemic levels. And please submit to us your position paper, especially data, no, so we can study it carefully. Maraming salamat po. This hearing is hereby adjourned.